Misinformation and build trust in the 2024 election. I'm Andrea Gabor. I'm the Bloomberg Professor of Business Journalism at Baruch College. Many of you know me. I'm also on the board of our local League of Women Voters of the Hamptons, Shelter Island, and the North Fork. I'm going to introduce our speakers, my colleagues, in a moment, but first I want to thank my colleagues at the League of Women Voters who helped make this happen, especially Susan Winston, our co-president, Neil Cohen, who does a fabulous job signing up voters, and he was manning the table outside a few moments ago, and especially Arlene Hinkmeyer, who wears many hats at the League, but most importantly, from the perspective of this program, is the publicity maven. So thank you, guys. I also want to thank Michael Clark of LTV Studios and his team, including Hudson and Zach. This is the second program that LTV Studios has hosted for us this year, so we are really grateful. Some of you may have been at our last event, which was a very informative educational event on the Equal Rights Amendment, which will be on the New York State ballot in November as Proposition 1. So let me just say a few words about our program. We are going to have a conversation here among three of us for about 50 minutes. Then I'm going to invite Minerva Perez and Bonnie Cannon, two very well-respected local leaders who I'm sure you're familiar with, to come up on the stage. And they will respond to and address some of the issues around misinformation that we've discussed and that particularly impact the local community. That'll take about 20 minutes, and then we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience for about 20 minutes, and we expect to wrap up by 8:30. So let me introduce my colleagues and participants in this conversation. Sonia Jarvis is I have to get her name pronunciation right by the end of this evening, is a graduate of Stanford University and Yale Law School. She has been teaching at Baruch for almost 20 years. She is currently a distinguished lecturer in the Marx School of Public and International Affairs. She is the former director of the Center of Equality, Pluralism, and Policy at the Marx School, and her specialty areas of teaching include nonprofit management, media and democracy, civil rights, and civil liberties. And she is the co-author with Don Weisenan and Nicole Gordon of States of Confusion: How Our Voter ID Laws Fail Democracy and What to Do About It. Welcome. Don Weisenan, who is appearing as the Wizard of Oz here on the big screen above me, is also a professor in the Marx School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College. Don's work focuses on elevating civic engagement and strategic leadership communication. He is the author of 7 books, wow, including the aforementioned States of Confusion, which of course he co-authored with Sonia Jarvis and Nicole Gordon. So my working relationship with Don really dates back to last semester, and that's really where the idea for this panel kind of percolated in my head. Because we taught a class together called The News Media, Toxic Sludge, and the Future of Democracy. The class was an honors college class with some of the brightest young people at the university. It was really an amazingly energetic, engaged, wonderful experience, I think, for all of us. But one of the most shocking and surprising moments, Don, I think you're going to agree, was when we asked the students, when we gave them an assignment to keep a social media log, a news and social media log for just one day of their social media consumption in a single day from the time that they woke up in the morning until they went to bed at night. Again, super engaged students, always did their homework, did the readings, many of them worked, many of them had quite serious family obligations. Every single one of them were keeping multiple streams of social media, YouTube, and multiple chat channels open all day long, okay? So that gives you an idea of this really extraordinary news and information ecosystem in which these young people live, and which is so different from certainly what I, and I think many of us, experienced. So let's segue to this year's elections and how this social media ecosystem is impacting our politics. We're seeing county clerks and secretaries of state overwhelmed with a tsunami of conspiracy theories, political pressure, and personal threats. So I'd like to start by asking Don, because he's done some recent research on this, how bad is disinformation in this election cycle, and how badly has it damaged trust in our elections?
Thanks, Andrea. I think there's multiple ways to look at this. There's bad news and there's good news. What I would start with here is, let's go back 100 years. There's a Supreme Court case that said you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. I think many people know of this. You can't just go to any theater and yell fire and have that fake news play out in a theater situation. Would be harmful to other people. They would be scrambling to get out of the theater. Yet here we are in 2024, and millions of people every day are yelling fire on crowded social media platforms. This is where we are at. The scale and speed of misinformation online has increased exponentially. Some of that is due to AI and things like that that we can talk about in a little bit. But it's for good reason that the World Economic Forum said that misinformation is the top global risk for the next 2 years, and probably beyond that, quite frankly. So I think the atmosphere of cynicism, distrust, things like that are what we should really hone in on with this. And it's when people don't know what is true that a lot of problems start, right? So these deep fake videos that many of you in the audience probably heard of play into that, for instance. And the question of how much and how bad this is incredibly hard to determine. I've heard all kinds of estimates on this, but here's the one thing I know. You don't have to know exactly how far and wide misinformation spreads. And misinformation, by the way, is disinformation is an attempt to deceive others with information that isn't true, right? And misinformation is basically putting that information forwarding that, not necessarily knowing that it's deceptive, but it's now in this kind of swirl of propaganda oftentimes that people are taking up. We don't have to know too much about, the exact scale of it. What we can see are the effects. And there's a whole lot of untraceable emails out there where misinformation thrives. There's the dark web, parts of the internet where it's very hard to determine and trace things. But we can certainly see through all kinds of examples in the past several years the impacts this has had on people's lives as they reject some very basic health information in their lives, and then it goes to more extremes, attacking cell phone towers and things like that. January 6th, was put in motion by a lot of that kind of information. So there's a real dark side to this. Now, I just want to highlight, because I think in this kind of forum, we could get incredibly pessimistic hearing all that's going on. But I do want to just share real quick, and I know we got to get to Sonia here. My colleague Amy Becker and I have been doing research since May of this year and trying to determine if people have trust in elections. A lot of misinformation, as I think everybody in the audience has probably seen, has to do with swirling information about the elections online. And we were pleased to discover, I will just show you this on my screen here, that between May and September, and this was from a national data set here. Can everybody see this? Can you see that? That this basically shows that on a 4-point scale of a national sample we've been tracking, that most people have pretty good trust in our election systems in the United States and have pretty good confidence that election administrations run well, people who run them have integrity, are doing the right things. And this goes on to show here, too, that while social and political trust, there's a lot of social trust out there, there's political trust, that people are pretty, overall, this is much higher than we expected. So I'll just go back to that one for a moment so you can see it a little more clearly. There's a lot of media narratives out there. There's stories that I think maybe overstate the distrust people have in election systems, for instance. And we're finding so far that that does not appear to be the case. It may be more an issue of outliers than anything else.
Great, thank you. Sonia, would you like to add something to that? Use your mic.
Yeah, how about that? I was so entranced by the commentary, I got lost for a second. I guess what I would say is that it is important to acknowledge that that trust element is under attack, okay? If we start there, then we can start thinking about how do we push back as a nation, not just individually, to say, hey, we had a pretty good system. It was working. Why isn't it working now? And how can we do better for this election? We just have a handful of weeks before we're back in the ballot boxes, and some states have already started right now. But even against that concern and distrust, that is also an element that Don's been trying to follow, people will show up if they're encouraged to do so. That's where I would start.
Thank you. And I just wanted to ask, since Don quickly touched on the definition of misinformation and disinformation, disinformation being the deliberate spreading of lies, or untruths, misinformation being the inadvertent spread of lies. Do you want to add anything to the definitions before we continue?
What I would add is that we're also not just talking about state actors. We're talking about people outside of the United States who are also trying to influence our electoral process by feeding disinformation and misinformation in ways that individuals on a regular basis have trouble figuring out. Is this real? How do I find out if it's real? How do I check it? And one of the areas we're going to talk about today is there are places where you can go to fact check the information you're receiving through social media and otherwise. That's a start.
Yes, absolutely. And again, this is an equal opportunity problem. You know, we recently heard that Iran is targeting the Trump campaign, the Russians are targeting the Harris campaign, so the international actors are really in the mix. But still in this country, we do tend to think about misinformation and disinformation. We tend to look at it through a partisan lens. Now, we also know that politicians from time immemorial have played fast and loose with the truth. And yet, we are seeing today, as Don mentioned, just an epic period of lying in our politics, right? Most recently, we heard about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs, and despite the best efforts of the Republican officials in Ohio to reject and to basically say those were false. We have a certain vice presidential candidate who has doubled down on those lies. But I'd like us to now take a step back and again look at this whole ecosystem in which propaganda thrives on the internet, and how it impacts all of us. So, Don, maybe beginning with you, could you talk a little bit more about this ecosystem and why it's so dangerous?
Yeah, I think one of the things to recommend, and Andrea, you started with our class where we had the students log their social media, but we actually asked the media, just give us how you get information of any kind. And we basically thought we should just make it a social media assignment because that's where they were getting their information. Journalists now play less of a gatekeeping role than ever. A lot of young people are turning to TikTok for political content and videos, things like that. So the whole infrastructure has changed. And for every comment a politician might make, you realize there's 1,000 commentaries about that, 10,000, going on to 1,000,000 commentaries about that really take whatever statements anybody might say easily out of context. It's hard to tell, what the truth might be in those circumstances. But on top of this, there's so much incentive out there for disseminating lies. I don't know how else to put it. There's conflict entrepreneurs, right? I mean, we can only put so much burden on individuals to swim upstream with this stuff when you have people who basically make money from just creating outrage. It's coordinated, it's profitable, going online and systematically setting up an infrastructure where lies just can compound. I have to share with you, I have an acquaintance on Facebook, I looked last year, who made a political post, and I saw nothing but 1,000, yes, 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 I agree, or after this person posted something. I just thought, there's something wrong here when not a single person, I counted right down, is saying, hey, I have a different point of view here, or would anybody be willing to talk about this? So it just proved to me that, this infrastructure we have is so, it's not set up to deal with human psychology well. It's not set up to deal with ignorance well. YouTube, it's about engagement and clicks. It's not about, oftentimes, is this true or not, things like that. And we, at the end of the day, have a lot of echo chambers that have just become solidified. So changing the structure of our ecosystem is incredibly important with this stuff, I think. And we can talk more about some of those solutions later. Last thing I'll say, AI and computer code don't take coffee breaks, right? It's one thing for, even with conflict entrepreneurs going out there, stirring up outrage and fear and overstating what's really known in a case. But when you put new technology tools to that kind of motivation to influence people, that way of motivating people, that's a little scary, right? It doesn't take coffee breaks. It just keeps going.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things we talked about just a few days ago is that there are excellent quality news sites, but they're behind a paywall, right? And for every quality news site, there's dozens, hundreds of toxic sludge, right? Spewing all sorts of nonsense. So, Sonia, how worried should we be about political candidates or foreign governments weaponizing our personal social media data, as Cambridge Analytica did a few years ago?
I think we should be very concerned, and I think it's going to even increase over the course of this election, but even beyond. And the reason I'm pessimistic about this is that we can go back and look at an act that was passed in 1996 under the Clinton administration, the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which could have prevented some of this just by requiring certain regulations to be put into place at that time but instead the decision was made to exempt social media from those restrictions. And because of that lack of guidance or coverage or regulations, we've seen what's happened to the internet since that time to present. It doesn't mean, and I'm not suggesting that we automatically shut down every social media site. That's not where I'm going. I'm saying instead, we can look at those places that are giving nothing but disinformation and saying you are going to be held to a higher standard than you have been to this point. That's a starting point, but it's not the ending point. We add to that another case that came out in 2010 that basically said, this is the Citizens United case, basically said, well, we're not going to control how much money campaigns can take. We're going to make it a free speech issue, a 5-4 decision that basically said corporations and people with deep pockets can put as much money into the election process as possible. That overturned 100 years of jurisprudence that said the state could regulate how and how much individuals would give to campaigns. We haven't recovered from that. Those two alone, there are other things that I could share with you, but I'm trying not to just make this a legal class. But to point out that those decisions have consequences that are affecting us right now in real time.
Thank you. I do want to get in a moment to what you were, to pick up on a thread you were starting on the Telecommunications Act. But first, could you expand a little bit on the impact of Citizens United, in particular on the creation of super PACs and how that has influenced dark money in campaigns? And if you could just sort of define those terms for our audience.
Sure. The easiest way to think about this is that prior to that decision in 2010, we had regulations that discussed how much an individual could give to a campaign, how much a corporation could give to a campaign, but also even individuals who did not disclose their identity, there were limitations. Those were all removed. That's the easiest way I can put it. And because of that, unlimited millions of dollars can now be given to a campaign without any restriction at all, under the theory that this is an act that the Supreme Court said was now appropriate under the circumstances of freedom of speech. That's where we started. And we haven't taken any action on the congressional level to change it since then.
Great, thanks. Sonia mentioned the Telecommunications Act of 1996. In case you missed that memo, it basically deregulated the news media so that today we have about 6 corporations that control the vast majority of news media now. And there are those who argue that social media companies should be treated today as as regulated utilities, not like deregulated news media companies. Sonia, what would it look like if we regulated social media companies like utilities? Okay, what's the argument there, the comparison? And what are the prospects for that happening?
Well, I'll start with the second. I don't see any prospects of it happening anytime soon. I would love to be optimistic, but it hasn't happened, and there hasn't been a systemic push towards it that we can look to and say, well, if there were a few more votes in the House or the Senate, it'll pass. That's not happening. So it means that we have to, I would argue, encourage citizens to demand more in terms of how are these social media outlets being regulated? Are they hurting our children? That's a place to start. It's one of the few areas where we see bipartisan support saying, let's protect the children from what they're seeing on social media. But even beyond that, I think it's this question of we haven't paid attention to the impact that those decisions have made and continue to make today. That's where I would start.
Great, thanks. Don, you in particular, I think, are maybe a little bit more optimistic, at least on the where it concerns regulations that might impact children, privacy. Can you talk about that a little bit? And if I'm misstating it, please set me straight.
Yeah, I'm ever the optimist, but so I'm looking for bright spots. I don't know that these are enough, but I think there's enough there's enough positive lawmaking, especially that's happened in various places in the world that point toward maybe how to do this. What you both said, I think, is exactly right. The two areas of common ground seem to be privacy and kids. Everybody wants privacy. We don't want surveillance in our lives, over to be overly surveilled, especially without our consent. And that has become a sticking point, and I think a way for the right and the left and the center, and there's various alliances that have formed around that point. And the second thing is absolutely kids, right? Just like a public utility regulates water or transportation, there seems to be this emerging consensus that the harms to children from digital media developments are astronomical or can be astronomical. So I think on those 2 points, we can definitely coalesce around those. And, the European Union charged X and Elon Musk with the charge was that misinformation was running rampant on the platform. And they've put this in terms of consent and various things like that, but they've actually passed a couple laws in the EU, and they're really recent, and not a lot of folks know about it, but limiting the power of big social media corporations from deleting independent media is one thing. So this is one of the things with the concentrated media. We talk about, there's less in charge almost, but this is also happening with the Googles, with the Apples, with the Facebooks, right? The EU has decided to take action on this and try to enforce this on a local level. A lot of it is under the purview of protecting children, because Europeans have decided that's the way they want to go. The other place, and it's just bubbling up a little bit, is Brazil. And hey, I want to acknowledge here too that the terms we use are important. We've been using misinformation, disinformation, because I think they speak to something, they capture something important here. But I have heard that on the right, for instance, that this is seen as censorship. And so a lot of this battle is they hear that word misinformation, it's censorship. And that's what's happened with the Brazil case, for instance, where Twitter got banned by a judge. Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it now. It'll change soon, probably again. But I think, and I was saying this to Sonia just yesterday, there's a role for lawyers and attorneys to play in this clearly, because systematic legal changes, I think, can make a difference, while really wrestling with the intricacies and nuances of, is this going too far? Is it too much censorship? But right now, we're drowning in this stuff. The world is drowning in this stuff. So the pendulum has to swing toward the other side.
Well, we also see what's happening at the school level. Schools are now asking students to put their phones away while they're in school. And there's resistance. The parents are completely behind it, but the students are like, wait a second, my whole life is on this phone. You're trying to take it from me. That's not fair. But at the heart of it is that concern of, are children able to learn when they're spending 80% of their minds on social media? And if we can at least have a chance to have a reasoned approach to that. But there's also the safety issues that go on. We had a number of shootings just in the last 3 weeks. And parents want to know that their children are fine and their phones are handy, but what if they're locked up in the locker and not available? So it's complex. That's the point I'm trying to make. But it is doable for both parents and schools to try and figure out a better way.
Great. Could we go back just for a moment to Europe and Brazil? In particular, how realistic is it, given our First Amendment protections, Don called it, the perception that it's censorship, but very legitimate First Amendment concerns. How likely is it in this country to be able to enact those kinds of regulations?
Well, I think it starts by, again, acknowledging legal cases and precedents that say that if danger is involved to the populace, that you can make changes and have restrictions. That's just one way to look at it. The fire that you were talking about earlier, Don, is one example of that. Yet we have not taken that step, in part because of these other cases I've discussed with you, where the Supreme Court has basically bailed on that issue so far.
So we may need a new Supreme Court.
You didn't hear me say that, but...
Andrea?
Yes,
Just,
go
I'll
ahead.
just say real quick, there are, right now, with AI developing so rapidly, there's about 120 bills in Congress on AI right now, which I think is a good indication that lawmakers, policymakers are sitting there going, no, it's not just free speech, especially when a robot is creating it. It's a new world. It's a new context, and we should try to get ahead of the curve with that. So I think there's evidence that this can work here already, but the extent to which that will be addressed is to be seen.
Actually, on that note, let me ask a question about self-regulation, because OpenAI recently banned the use of ChatGPT for political campaigning. Can you, Don, perhaps, and Sonia, if you have something to add to that, talk about whether or not self-regulation is at all an option here, a workable option?
I don't know how it's enforced, right? I don't know. It's great that OpenAI banned ChatGPT back in January from political campaigning, but good luck, right? I mean, tracing the source of things would be incredibly difficult and problematic. I'm putting on my optimist hat here again for a moment. I don't want to just be a downer this whole thing here. I do think that as technology develops, what we do tend to see are measures to counter that. So for instance, these deep fake videos, which are incredibly problematic, right? Videos just where it is pure fake news. There are emerging tools to detect whether a video is deep fake in a way that a human being cannot, right? Just as universities have plagiarism tools in place to detect if a student's writing has copied from another source, I think increasingly we'll see these counter tools develop. And so that will help. But to go back to what Sonia was saying, when you have a Citizens United decision that just allows anyone to pour $1 million into ads and spread them wildly, countermeasures are only going to be able to go so far with that.
Well, I guess if we start with the proposition that artificial intelligence is going to be with us and is not going to disappear, it means we have to take more concerted action to encourage those companies to control their AI, and that's not happening. That's the kind of thing that a grassroots organization could be behind to encourage parents and those who care about the type of information their children are receiving to stop it, as opposed to encouraging deep fakes, which means that the information is not true, that someone else's face is placed on yours, and you have no control over that. You could go through a lawsuit, but you might not have the resources to fight a company that can spend millions of dollars to fight your case. So it's not encouraging. I'm trying to be positive, but it can be part of the efforts of parents and others who care about what their children are being exposed to and want to fight back.
Actually, again, for a little bit of optimism, picking up on what Sonia said about citizen action, this is not completely analogous, but a few years ago when, and this is before the pandemic, when technology in classrooms started to get really big and the idea that every child should have a laptop became popular, and administrations were beginning to consolidate all of the information about children, including absenteeism, whether their parents were incarcerated, disciplinary actions, all that stuff into kind of one database. A group of parents got together, and I'm going back now, in my memory, but I think it was it ended up being a national movement to keep those, because what these tech companies were then doing was they were going to sell that information to others, right? So theoretically, a 6-year-old who'd had a disciplinary action against him, who's maybe had an incarcerated parent, whatever, that information would live in the cloud somewhere and could be accessed years later, right? And so these parents got together and pretty successfully, as far as I recall, block that effort. So citizen action is a real thing that can be helpful. But let's segue now, since both of you have talked about AI and deep fakes. Deepfakes are AI-generated images, just so we're clear on the definitions, that manipulate a person's likeness and voice to create false pictures, audios, or videos. For me, this is personal because there are videos out there of me speaking in fluent Chinese, which I can't speak, hawking everything from relationship advice to products because my likeness and voice were stolen by Chinese hackers. So this can happen to anyone. But we know that when Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris, she explained that she did so because the Trump campaign had used a fake video of her that made it appear falsely as though she was endorsing Trump. So can we talk a little bit about how much of a threat deepfakes pose to our elections? Don, do you want to take this first?
It's the sharing of deep fakes that actually concerns me even more. It's the rivers in which this flows. There's a lot of research the past few years showing, 30 to 40% of fake news is from habitual news sharers, for instance, that fake news is something like 70% more likely to be shared to go at scale. So if it's just a video that's created, you discover there's probably ways of dealing with that, but it's the blossoming, the burgeoning of this kind of information across the internet and across places where people might see it, might rise in a YouTube ranking, for instance, that makes it very difficult to address. So yeah, I'm hopeful that there's tools which will again address this even more, but it's tough. We are swimming upstream on this issue as well, and I think this is really where tech accords, meaning social media companies, platforms coming together, which they are doing quite a bit of already, to figure out how to address this. Is going to make a big difference. Just to give you an example, I mean, I would recommend everybody, if you come across an image you have any reservation about, you go, it seems like that might be an image that's taken out of context, you can do a reverse Google image search, right? So what we need on Google and all these kinds of platforms are tools to help us figure out what's real and what isn't.
Don, you broke up a little bit there, so when we get to the very end, which we're almost there, sharing what we can do about it, just remember what you just said so that you can repeat it. Sonia?
Well, I will build on what Don just shared with our audience, and and say that deep fakes are real and they're getting worse. And if that's the case, how can families protect their children, their students in college, themselves? And it's not a comfortable feeling. Nobody, if you haven't felt it and you do, become a victim of this type of misappropriation of your face and voice and your feelings about things, it's hard. And it's the type of thing, if I were doing the type of work that the League does on a regular basis and talking to people about what's important to you, this is the type of issue that's going to continue to emerge. It's not going to go away. It's too easy, in part because of how easy it is to manipulate AI to do this type of work.
You know, before we get to how we can inoculate ourselves against mis and disinformation, and I think I can see enough into the audience, can I see a show of hands of who has inadvertently perpetuated some kind of misinformation? They've seen something on Facebook or Twitter and clicked on it because it sounded right. Can I see a show of hands? Yeah, I know I have, okay? So roughly a third of the folks in the audience have raised their hands. So I think at least part of the solution, a small part of the solution, starts with us, right? So Don and Sonia, how do we inoculate ourselves? What are some of the techniques? And maybe we can bat that around a little bit, and then Don, maybe you can share our cheat sheet for some other ideas.
Cheat sheet?
Well, Don, do you want to just start by talking about how to inoculate ourselves?
Sure. I would say first and foremost, for anyone out there listening to this, anytime someone tells you to be outraged or fearful, that is the moment to put on your critical thinking hat. The moment anyone says you should feel this way, right, and especially be angry, that particular emotion, these are emotions that have been manipulated, continue to be so in our election discourse and media. And there are truly things to be outraged and fearful about in this world, right? I don't like spiders. I don't like snakes. I got a whole list for you, right? But there is an overstatement oftentimes about how fearful or outraged we should be, and it's a button that is pushed over and over. It is right out of classical propaganda playbooks, right? Just repeat this over and over, make people feel this way. So that's my big one. Suspicion, fear really feeds irrationality, and it's a good moment to try to be measured and go, should I really be fearful here? That's a big one. I also think that learning the skills, learning about propaganda techniques should be in every curriculum now, every school. We should learn about social proof, which is the idea that when sometimes we don't know what to do, looking around and seeing what others are doing seems like the right thing. And that's something that has been baked into digital media, is there's others like you, they do this thing, they think this thing. And when everybody's looking left, look right. When everybody's looking right, look left. These are at least two really good critical thinking skills I think everybody needs to we need to all remind ourselves to cultivate.
Don, you broke up a little bit. Can you just repeat what you were saying about social cues?
Yeah, I was saying that learning the classical techniques of persuasion and propaganda is a good way to inoculate oneself and others against this stuff. To stop getting caught in talk of positions. I have this position, you have this position, and to raise the discussion to a higher level of how are we persuaded to anything in the first place here, right? Was I persuaded to this issue because of what people like me, I perceive to be like me, believe? That's social proof, for instance, and can be used for good or ill, but repetition, social proof, things like that, I think are incredibly important to hone in on.
Sonia, what's at the top of your list?
Well, at the top of my list would be a group like the News Literacy Project. It's nonpartisan, and they're trying to encourage young people, those still in school, to understand before they graduate why it's important to know the facts as opposed to misinformation or disinformation that they're hearing from the media or from social media. But I guess its ultimate aim is to make sure that they're able to participate in our civic society as informed critical thinkers. And that, again, if you're teaching, whether it's at the graduate level or in elementary schools, it's encouraging the young folks to say, there are ways you can find out if that information you heard online is true or not. And we want to show you how to do that, so that at least you're arguing facts and not fiction or just terrible lies. That's one way we can do it.
And I'd like to pick up on that with a plea to teachers and superintendents and principals to bring back civics, if it isn't already embedded deeply in your curriculum, and news literacy. News literacy is absolutely vital. Another thing that's at the top of my list, which I teach my students, but I don't think it just has to be college students, anyone can do this, is when you see a website or you click on something and you see it's coming from a particular organization, click on the About page, okay? Find out who runs the organization, who funds it. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of clicking if you just see names that don't necessarily mean a lot to you. Google those names a little bit. Doesn't take very long. And you can very quickly figure out, is this a liberal or far liberal organization? Is it a right-wing organization? Or is it somewhere in the middle? Just so you sort of know the perspective and point of view, because all news media and information has a point of view, so that you know where it's coming from. Anything else? Don, you've talked about reverse Google images and pre-bunking. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, pre-bunking is the idea of raising, I think like we're doing in this very forum, here's the types of things you might see coming down the road in this election. You might see an image that you should take a second look at, think about it, and not just let that kind of go into your consciousness super fast, right? Here's where one more thing I would add to all of this, and I think the world needs this more than ever. Teaching the differences between three modes of communication we can all be in when we talk about elections and politics is incredibly important. There's debate, there's deliberation, and there's dialogue. And I've met a lot of students and folks who've never done anything but debate when it comes to politics. They think everything is about marshaling a case for your side and winning, right? And there's times when that mode of communication is incredibly important. But dialogue, just going, you know what, I'm just going to learn about what someone else believes, how they got there, questioning. There's a whole method called deep canvassing that's emerged where canvassers go door to door and they just engage people in discussions about how they came to the positions they came to. And listening to understand is incredibly important with that. And deliberation is just when we all have an issue, there's potholes in the roads outside in the city here, we need to come together and make a collective decision. That's a different mode of communication. So I say, as much as possible, teach debate, dialogue, and deliberation as at least three ways of communicating. And I think that's another way through this thicket that we're in.
Sonia, do you want the last word? And then we'll put up our cheat sheet. Oh, sure, because the cheat sheet is very important and the group has to have it. But beyond that, it's understanding how important this election that's coming up is going to be. And the decisions people make in whether or not to vote will make a difference in terms of the type of programs that we will see going forward to either address these issues that we've raised with you or resign ourselves to a process where we can't believe the news. anymore. I don't think that's a good place to be for a democracy, but that's just my opinion.
Okay, I think we've had a little optimism, a little pessimism. Great. So Don, can you share our cheat sheet, please? And then in a moment, I'm going to invite Minerva and Bonnie up. Ooh,
Sure.
we're not getting the whole page there.
I know. I will scroll down. I will scroll just so you can
What?
see it.
He'll scroll down.
He'll scroll down. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you're going to see, actually, Don, do you want to say just a few things about the news and misinformation literacy category?
Sure. So down here in the second category, these are two great starting points for yourself, for others. They're good sites to share. One is the News Literacy Project, which sends out daily, weekly emails, just pinpointing
We're losing
where
you.
misinformation.
You know what? Let's let Sonia talk about news literacy again because she had started on that. Maybe say something about allsides.com?
Which one? The
Allsides.com?
With All Sides, it provides coverage at left, right, and center news sources and gives consumers an opportunity to compare and contrast. So it's across the board. That's one approach. Another, under the News Literacy Project, it's nonpartisan and it works with teachers, educators, journalists to give students the skills they need to understand news and information sources and which ones are trustworthy. The two, you want to go down?
Yeah. Don, can you scroll down so we can see the fact check sites? Yes. Okay. Perfect. Stop right there. I just want to mention one thing as you all look at these fact check sites. And by the way, this is going to go up on YouTube. So this will be there as well. I just wanted to mention the two little asterisks at the bottom. This refers to the fact that most of these sites have basically sort of certified these organizations. One is the Media Bias Fact Check Organization, and the other one, International Fact Checking Network. And I'll briefly just read to you as you're looking at this list what they are. Founded in 2015, MBFC is an independent website that has promoted awareness of media bias and misinformation by rating the bias, factual accuracy, and credibility of media sources, large and small. MBFC relies on human evaluators to determine the bias of media sources and the level of overall factual reporting through a combination of objective measures and subjective analyses. And they actually print their methodology. International Fact Checking Network is part of the Poynter Institute, which is a global nonprofit that seeks to strengthen democracy by improving the relevance, ethical practice, and value of journalism. IFCN was launched also in 2015 to bring together the growing community of fact checkers around the world. The network advocates for information integrity in the global fight against misinformation and supports fact checkers through networking, capacity building, and collaboration. Okay, great. Well,
Then back to, Don, back to the top, the few at the very top of the list. If you-
if you could scroll to voting.
Right.
You want, okay.
With respect to voting, we've listed Vote for 11 or vote.org as a place you can go to get help with registration, help with voting, and election-related questions answered. Ballotpedia is a nonprofit and nonpartisan encyclopedia, which is designed to connect people to politics utilizing a neutral point of view philosophy. And the last one, the National Association of Secretaries of State, has information on every state and its voting process if you don't know where else to go. It's a good place to start. So just want to make sure we pointed those out.
Great, thank you. I think that concludes our conversation among the three of us. That's So now I would like to invite Minerva Perez and Bonnie Cannon on the stage and see what their reactions and thoughts are, and I will also introduce them once they're up here.
Come on over. There you go.
So, Bonnie Cannon to my right is executive. No, I'm not on. Okay. Bonnie Cannon to my right is executive director at Bridgehampton Child Care and Recreational Center, a historically Black community-based organization. Although, as she told me, it serves really a wide range of demographic groups in the area. She's also the first African-American woman elected to the Southampton Board of Trustees, and she serves as a commissioner of the Suffolk County Human Rights Commission. So welcome, Bonnie. Thank you for being here. Minerva Perez is executive director of Organización Latinoamericana of Eastern Long Island, OLA. Her work centers on the protection, empowerment, and celebration of the local Latino community. Before joining OLA in 2016, she was the director of residential and transitional services at The Retreat, where she ran a 24-hour crisis shelter for women and children fleeing domestic abuse. She was also deeply involved in local outreach efforts during the COVID pandemic, and Ms. Perez regularly participates in panels and public forums focused on immigration rights and women's rights. So, welcome. So, what did you think? What are your thoughts? How does all of this relate to this community?
Let me jump in. Whoa. you want to start? I'll start then. I love this forum. Thank you, Andrea. Sonia, it's really nice to meet you. Yeah. Happy to be up here with Bonnie as well. So I want to start off by saying that this topic is really hugely important. Out here on the east end of Long Island, we do have about 24 school districts, and across those 24 school districts, the low average the number I can give you is 50% are Latino. 50%. And so in terms of how our Latino families and our children engage across our community is very important. And the higher the degree of fear, of exploitation, of scarcity that's put out there, of violence, of pitting one against the other, what we do is we create isolation, and we create even more of a need to have your information and your source of protection come from that phone. So as much as I want to pull phones away from kids and all that, or people are just glued to them at the same time, oftentimes some of the news sources that we have, and we're lucky to have a lot of really great news sources right here and even in the room, East End Beacon, Tu Prensa Local is another great one, is that we need to find a way to balance out using this technology, using social media. Half the time when we were dealing with hiding people from raids, I had to rely on social media to make sure I could tell people what roads not to go down because there were unmarked vans pulling over random cars on their way to work. So we have to find a way, and we have to recognize that while we have our communities that we hold so close and so dear, if we're not dedicated to their protection and their safety, they're going to be put in isolated situations where all they're going to have is and disinformation. It's going to be used against them, and it's going to be used against all of us. So I do want to put that point out there, and I will say that some of some data that I got just kind of looking around at some good sources is that 70% of Latinos use WhatsApp. 58% use Facebook, 60% Facebook, 58 Instagram, which is about 11% higher usage rate than others. So there's a lot of use of this. But really, it's, I think, also when we talk about what we can do and what the context of things is, I think we just have to recognize that as well. Like, we all can be a part of not just pushing people into corners so that the only place they can get that information is bad sources.
First of all, I want to thank you all for inviting me. For those, I was introduced Bonnie Cannon. And I just want to make sure that we get our mission statement correct, because I am the executive director from the Bridgehampton Child Care and Recreational Center, but we are a historically black community-based institution who serve all East End marginalized children and families. We've been doing that for the past 70 plus years. And that's important to me because of the fact that we're not just dealing with Bridgehampton, but we're dealing with the East End of Long Island, and the demographics, when you look at that, is pretty much it's a mixed, but it's a mix of marginalized and underserved communities. It's Latino individuals, it's African Americans, it's white individuals, it's the indigenous nation. It's all marginalized and underserved. And one of the things that we deal with, for me, is for me to be really successful with the children, with any child, I have to deal with the family and with the community. And so it's more than just, dealing with the children. But when we talk about dealing with the children and with pretty much anybody right now, a big part of that is that everyone is utilizing this. They're utilizing this in many ways, be that Facebook, be that TikTok, be that chat, be that you talked about Chat GPT with the AI that's coming. And so what do you do? Because all of this misinformation is coming. And right now, especially during this time, with the what I call the most important election that is coming up, there is just too much information. So one of the things that I'm doing right now, and one of the things that I'm looking at when we're looking at our children and how do we change things, there's several things that we're looking at and how it affects us, is to look at what's the issue, what's to the root of everything. And what I see and what I'm looking at and how this kind of plays over into everything that we're looking at is that I'm reading a book right now called Stolen Focus. And it's, how do we get our attention back? We're not paying attention. And so that basically is one of the main things, is to how do we get back to paying attention? And what's being affected is the information. We're getting pretty much a truckload or a fire load of information that's coming at us every single day. It's like spitting out like fire. And because it's spitting out like fire, you're getting good information, you're getting bad information, but are you paying attention and are you really absorbing the information? So what I'm looking at from a civic standpoint and the misinformation is that what I'm looking at is how do we get back to that? And so what we're doing right now is trying to get the kids to slow down. Slow down. Okay? Everyone just slow down. The other thing is that we're looking at also is to read. Get back to reading again. From a civic standpoint, one of the things that we're doing at the center is that we have a big literacy, and we're trying to get the kids to love going back to the library. Research. You talked about your facts, and you talked about research your facts, just not taking the first word, but researching. And I guess I'm talking about the solutions, some of the solutions, but everyone is impacted by this misinformation, and it's really not just for the marginalized, but it's for everyone, because we don't know what's true anymore. As you talked about, we don't know what to trust. We don't know what to believe, and especially now, you have to not, as the gentleman says, just take the first word. You have to stop, and you have to slow down. You have to read. You have to research. And so those are some of the things that we're talking about at the center. We have something called the Thinking Forward lecture series, where we actually bring in individuals to talk about certain topics. We've had Nicole Hannah-Jones, we've had Brian Stevenson, we've had Khalil Gibran Muhammad to come in, we'd have Reverend Barber to come in. We have different individuals so that they are face to face with you, talking about these different types of issues that we're looking. So it's not just, having conversations. I love the fact that you talked about, when you talked about debate and dialogue, having more dialogue and more conversations. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but I wanted to pretty much to talk about the things and the solutions, because we can talk all day about, what's happening, and Minerva has pretty much the same thing that's going on with the misinformation and how our people are being affected pretty much badly because of the misinformation. They don't know what to believe. They don't trust anyone. They're being pretty much hurt into society from the lowest, from crime, from the police, from everyone. It's just, education. It's just bad all around. So, some of the solutions, and I love the fact that you have put up the cheat sheet, because now we can talk about the cheat sheet, but from a civic standpoint, as I had told you earlier, we got to talk to our kids about the civic issues. At the center, we actually have a mock election where we have the kids to go through a mock election. We talk to them about the Electoral College. We talk to them about why it's important to vote. And we just not talk about it, but we illustrate it as well. And to do that, that takes time. So we can't just be in this fast motion type of thing. We have to be in slow motion. We have to be repetitive. And we have to help them to get and learn. If they learn nothing more than why it's important for me to go and vote, then let's stick on that until they get it. So, I don't know.
Oh, this is great. Thank you. I want to be on your mailing list. Can I just see a show of hands here? Are there any teachers in the room? Oh, great. Yeah, fabulous. So Minerva, you were mentioning I can't remember the exact number of school districts in this area, but it's a lot. And I'm really impressed by what you're trying to do in terms of civic engagement, media literacy, et cetera. Can you guys give me a sense of how are the schools in this area doing on news literacy and civics? Do you have a sense of that?
I'll jump in. Unfortunately, it's probably not going to be the best answer. Hopefully the folks in the audience that are maybe in some local school districts can tell me I'm wrong. But I think there definitely are social studies teachers. There are leaders within schools and that really do highlight the importance of that. And I'm sure in some school districts, I don't know that there's a trend of sort of civics that's taken hold again in the way that it should. So I think that there's a lot more there. I think that's also where nonprofits, in terms of some of the work that we can do in a nonpartisan way, because we have to do it in a nonpartisan way, kind of allow us to step into some of those spaces. Very quickly, I did want to just make one mention of the fact that with Spanish and Spanish language, that there's an additional concern
Yes.
that came up in terms of social media blind spots. Facebook in 2019 only employed about 5% Latino teams, and they were not diverse even within that. So of the 20 plus Spanish speaking nations, it's not easy to flag, but they could figure out how to do it. The other big thing that is in terms of solution is that, I don't know if it's out, I'm not sure, I'm sure it hasn't passed, but I think it's called the Communications Decency Act, and there's a section of that evidently the Facebook whistleblower that kind of came out about what could be done. Two things could be done. That could be amended so that it's more open and transparent about the algorithms that Facebook uses, number one, and number two, could change it up so that the social media organizations and companies would not be protected any longer from lawsuits in relation to their illegal content. So if you have some of those things in place, it's the money, it's the bottom line. I mean, there are ways that we can affect this change, but I just wanted to mention that and the Spanish language itself.
Yeah, just the schools. At one point in my life, I was really kind of, frustrated with the school system, with the school system, and in several different areas, especially with our public school system in several different areas, and even you talk about the civics, but I've learned basically that a lot of that they really don't have control over because it's a bigger umbrella than they're under rules and regulations, and there's things that they have to do. So my thing is that I think that this is the opportunity where, so to answer your question, they do civics. They do civics, but do they do it to the extent that it is impactful? That I don't know. But I think that basically that's where grassroots organizations come in, because we pretty much are, for a lack of a better term, unregulated, and we have more opportunities and more opportunities to address those types of situations in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, I just want to add something, and then we're bumping up against our stop time, and I want to open it up to the audience, but maybe Don and Sonia, you can think for a moment if there's just something you want to add before we open it up. I did just want to mention that, yes, this whole testing culture, which incidentally Long Island has been really kind of leading the resistance to, and of course, the testing culture, I think, has abated a little bit, but that really got in the way of a rigorous commitment to civics, let alone news literacy. But I did just want to say that schools that are committed to this kind of thinking are able to do it. It's just that the will to do it is not always there, and I think this political moment really demands that schools deal with both civics and news literacy. And I'll just add that I know in New York City, I don't know what it's like on Long Island, there's really been a drop in the number of schools that have school newspapers. And school newspapers are often, and by the way, outside of New York, in a lot of communities around the country, sometimes, as small newspapers have died, it is school newspapers that are actually covering what's going on locally, right? And so there are a lot of efforts now to really train student journalists, and that's, again, a very important step in civic and news literacy education. So briefly to wrap it up, Don and Sonia, do you want to add anything to what Connie and, Bonnie and Minerva just said?
I just really resonated, Bonnie, with your call to slow down. I love that. I want the t-shirt for that, frankly. I think it's brilliant. We all could do a bit more of that. Slow down, get humble about what you know, and start talking to others. Look for good sources. That's great. And then what Minerva mentioned about the design choices of our media systems is utterly critical. If AI, for instance, right now has all the data being put into it as just Eurocentric data, it's going to exclude in its very design and structure. So it can't just be up to individuals to make choices. We have to design our systems for media in ways that are equitable and inclusive.
And I also think it's important for us to look at what's happening to our libraries and the fact that they've been taken over in some states, and certain books aren't allowed to be read anymore that have been read for hundreds of years, I mean literally. That's a danger, and I think it's something that each community should be asking, what are our libraries doing? What type of setting are they providing for the children, especially the young children, because that's where they very often learn how to read first. And beyond that, is it a place for students to study and feel safe while they're doing it? So I'd start there.
Well, thank you all. This is fabulous, and I have a feeling we may have some questions from the audience. Yes, I see a hand there, but let me just ask, is there a mic for the audience? If not, I'll walk around with mine. Okay, that's right. Well, we want the video.
I just wanted to echo what Minerva said about how susceptible the Latino community is to misinformation. We've been targeted in particular places like South Florida, and rumors will boomerang from Bogota to Boston and back and forth, and that's the way they tend to circulate. And I want to commend you on your little cheat sheet, and I want to recommend maybe one more site to add on to it. It's called factchequeado.com, and it is a nonprofit fact-checking resource for Spanish language.
Nice.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's factchequeado.com. Factchequeado. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm Ambassador Susan Johnson Cook. I was in the Obama and the Clinton administrations. And hello, everyone. And I applaud the diversity tonight of the panel. I'm on the LTV board, which is how I found out about tonight's meeting. So I was intrigued by the word dialogue tonight. How can we, with the League of Women Voters, increase the dialogue between the communities that are out here on the East End? Because Bonnie's not just the only representative of the Black community, and Minerva's not just the only one. So I think it's important what we had in here tonight, that we have the diversity in the League of Women Voters as well. And so I'm applauding you for having this, and I would like to be a part of it and spread the word to our communities for dialogue.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally second that. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because oh, Barbara, Barbara Moss.
Thank you all. It's been wonderful. Really, obviously, I know Andrea. I was fortunate enough to work with her on the ERA. So, Andrea, tell me something. You said that you found yourself spreading misinformation. What fact did you spread that you then found out wasn't right? I can't believe it.
Okay, so boy, you're putting me on the hot seat. Honestly, I can't remember. It was a couple of years ago, and it was one of those rumors that seemed plausible. It seemed plausible, and it came from someone that I trusted, okay? But I'll tell you, after that happened, I have never again retweeted or sent around a Facebook post that I hadn't myself vetted. It was a really good lesson. Yeah. Anybody else? Sure.
When you all suggested we as citizens be active in the telecommunications issue, are we supposed to reach out to our Congress people? Are we supposed to reach out to the Congress people to initiate this? The telecommunications.
Yes. Yes, I'd like my fellow panelists to respond to this. Sonia and then Don?
Sure, it's obviously a place to start, but it also comes from the community, and the community can start asking those who have a role in governance and in passing legislation to come and talk to you the same way we are and say, we want to see more.
Wait, one
Yeah,
actually, one
yeah.
thing, just jump in for a second, Bonnie, is that I know that Kathy Hochul's been putting some things out there for the Safe for Kids Act, and a lot of that is really focused on New York State Data Protection Act, but something like this maybe to say, okay, this should be tacked on, and have her get behind it as well from the governor's perspective.
Yeah, no, I was just going to reiterate what you were saying is that the community needs to come together and pretty much have more of this dialogue, as Ambassador Susan Johnson Cook has said, and to have more dialogue with different individuals to come in that are key to the political scene or connected there, to have more more conversations and more things of that sort. You have someone right here in the community that basically could come and pretty much dialogue on several things. And because of the ambassador, I have seen quite a few webinars and things from the White House and and we have that right here in our community to keep us up to date and to, you know, continue just to have the dialogue. That's it. We need to talk. We need to get together and talk more, get away from this, stop looking at the screen, and let's, you know, let's have more conversations like this.
Great, thank you. Don, do you want to add to that or no?
I would just add one thing, which is that I think when we think about communication acts or laws and policies, it can seem so very high level. And public policies and laws only come about from storytelling, right? There's no law about cyberbullying until children experience that and parents and communities experience the effect of that. So I would say the easiest, most accessible place to start with any of this is to start collecting the stories, real stories of people being affected in communities. And I love this, the local activism in particular is a way to cultivate those and then contact your policymakers.
Thanks. So they gave you a moment to think about your questions. Are there any other questions or comments?
This isn't a question, but I'm sure many people here watch PBS. And Judy Woodruff has had this Talking to America kind of program, and last night she had a dialogue, a true dialogue, with about 50 or 60 voters from Wisconsin, and had them stand up and talk about, you know, you said this about abortion and you said that, and you really could hear people saying, well, I understand that maybe I could see your point of view. So I don't do social media. I'm happy that I don't, but there is some stuff on television on certain channels which are trying to do this.
Thank you.
May
That's
I
a
add
great
something
observation.
on-
Yes,
sorry.
yes, yes.
Just
please
in
go
terms
ahead.
of trends and to what Bonnie was saying about slowing down is that a lot of currency is placed on just how quickly we can make a decision, how quickly we can learn the data that we now believe is true, even in terms of voter data. So because the Latino vote is oftentimes either, there's so much kind of weight put on it, at the same time, there's no love and care actually put on within a community. So when you have information, or whether it's being on a school board, whether it's being a trustee, whether it's being a council person, whether it's being mayor, whether it's running for Congress, whether it's running for Senate, this information on a local level doesn't resonate. It doesn't allow, that's not allowed to exist in Spanish because the language of Spanish is so politicized. The conversations that I like to have a lot have to do with vote influencers, which is exactly, completely reliant on dialogue. So to not just cut out that person, because I don't think that person's documented, not yet. That person's only 15, they can't vote yet. But if I start having conversations with vote influencers about what the experience is living right here, their own lived experience, their grandma's lived experience, right here in the East End of Long Island, what their aspirations are, what their pains are, what their dreams are, that's a conversation that you're having. And then you're not just looking at someone as a statistic. We're cutting people down. We're shortening everything. So to Bonnie's point, slow down, and to all of us, as you know, where we're seeing the humans among us, because each and every one of them has a reason to be engaged in a conversation. And if you don't speak the language, find someone who does, and a lot of people are also speaking English at the same time. But it's just very important to not cut people out, and I think we're doing a lot of that.
Wow, that's a great observation. I just want to, you reminded me of this, even though you didn't address it directly. But school boards, there are places around this country where juniors and seniors are allowed to sit on school boards. And in California especially, it's been in Oakland, for example, it's been incredibly effective in getting the concerns, you know, of students who are on the front lines and see what's sort of missing in a school, for example, you know, of getting that information out there, and they serve as an incredible bridge between, you know, the electorate and young people. So, you know, teenagers on school boards, I'd say it's worth considering.
Hi, thank you all. This has really been fabulous. But the thing that struck me so much, I have a 23-year-old and a 30-year-old daughter. They went to very fine universities. They're very bright, and they get their information from TikTok, which drives me crazy. I speak to my friends' kids, and we talk about the election, and they don't read a paper. They don't listen to regular, unbiased news. They just listen to TikTok. I grew up in Brooklyn. And when I grew up in New York a million years ago, New York City had 8 daily newspapers representing, plus an Hispanic newspaper. I mean, it was there. There was so much, even local newspapers, Brooklyn, Queens, where thought was different. But you got a lot of opinions. And I would suggest if any of you can go into New York City and see Robert Downing Jr. in a play called McNeil, because McNeil is all about AI. It's about him winning a Pulitzer, but writing through AI. It's a frightening and amazing thought. I have to say I'm a little depressed. I'm hopeful, but I'm depressed. I mean, there are some teenage kids that I interact with, and I asked them what they thought about the convention. And they said to me, "What convention?" When the convention was going on. Bright kids and, really good students. Thank you all again, and thank you.
We'll take one more question, but I wanted Don, if I'm not putting you on the spot, because I remember when we did the social media log, one of the things that struck me, and I'm just, it's not at the top of mind right now, is that it's not impossible to get actually high quality news sources off of these social media sites. And our students were pretty sophisticated about having sort of feeds and alerts. Don, do you remember how that worked?
Yeah, I mean, they had to express some interest in news to begin with, I think, to get there. So that just created more engagement with, the types of sites that had good news. But I mean, this is also another example of swimming upstream. And I think the person in the audience there that just shared about local news, I think we need to name it. Local news in the United States has been a market failure. Profitable corporations have not been able to fill in the local news gaps that we need. Other countries have pointed the way toward this. I think there are lots of bright spots. The BBC gives funding now to local reporting across the UK and to report on local governing bodies and such. These are gaps that have to be filled.
Yeah, absolutely. One more question?
Thank you so much. I really wanted to elaborate on the kind of statistic and what I think is that a lot of marginalized communities are not sorry, let me pause. I'm a young trans woman, and in this country, I believe my community is very much on the ballot this year regarding our rights and our livelihoods. And I think because of the disinformation being spread about our community, it is making people see us as trans first and human second. And I think that is what the disinformation is causing, especially spread by political leaders, which we've seen in the debate recently. So I think it's important that we see disinformation as a tactic to make people not seen as subhuman, is what we're seeing. So I think it's important to always look at people as humans first before their identity and where they come from.
Thank you for that comment. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that too often we're allowing that type of disinformation to discourage people from participating. And there's a purpose behind it, not just, oh, let's just focus on this group and make them feel that they are not part of our nation. So whatever we can do to say that's not the case, that you do have a role, that you do have a place, that you are part of this nation, that's a starting point. But we have to be aware of it and do something and not simply throw up our hands and say this is sad, right?
Because there's violence connected to all of it.
Yes.
So that misinformation and disinformation and fear doesn't just, land itself and stay around the internet in a mean, ugly way. It turns into literal violence that kills people. And I just think it's something that we have to always keep in mind as well.
And I'll just add, we talk about the misinformation and the fear. I mean, even with, if we look back at the history, which are the facts, there's always been fear within the marginalized community, just with us looking at the facts and right now trying to erase the history and the facts that have been going on for hundreds of years here, and where people have been, put in a fearful state because of the facts. So put that on top of misinformation, and when you look at it, across the board, be you Latino, be you trans, be you a black person, it's just it's very scary.
And
It's very
silencing.
scary.
Silencing.
Yes, yes.
Okay, this young person is going to get the last word.
Hello. You guys talked about misinformation a lot, but what about like biased or filtered information, especially with the rise of social media and like algorithms? Like a lot of people, especially young people, are only getting information tailored for them.
Well, that's the thing, in that Stolen Focus book that I'm reading, that basically it talks about the algorithms. It talks about basically before we had all of the social media, everyone would, talk about different subjects and things of that sort. But now, since you have all the social media out there, everyone can kind of channel as to what they want to receive, the type of information they want to receive, the type of news they want to look at, the type of shows that they want to look at. You can, and once you do that, then that allows you to be manipulated by the algorithms, and so the algorithms can pretty much, put you in a place where, that you are being manipulated. And these are things that we have to teach, not just, teach our young children and teach our youth as well, as to how, these algorithms are put together, how, why it's important to have dialogue and to have different conversations on different topics with different people instead of just in your rabbit hole of what it is that you're looking at. And that all goes to that algorithm thing. So yeah, that's a big piece of it. And at some point in time, we're going to explode. It can't. We gotta. Something has got to change.
Don, Sonia, do you want to address that last comment about bias and how we're all being funneled into groups?
I'll just add one thing, which is just to say, right off of what Bonnie was saying there are actual studies, there's scholarship now. Thurburn and Ovadia have this thing about, it was right off the Facebook whistleblowing thing, saying these algorithms are out of control. And it's actually been tested. Instead of having engagement-based algorithms that only give you what you want to see, they only put you down sort of selective avenues of exposure to information because that's what you'll click on and keep going with. There are actual bridging-based algorithms that have been developed where, for instance, the rank of content receiving positive feedback comes from people who would normally disagree with it. So what you end up seeing is what broader others have been exposed to, and there's more crowdsourcing. So there's a lot of ways forward with this, but we can't deal with this without dealing with the algorithms themselves.
And I think it's important for us to encourage Congress, our state legislatures, our city councils to have this issue as an issue to be debated and discussed, and not just act as if everything that's happening in social media is a good thing, because it isn't. Instead, let's take a look at it and analyze it and decide what needs to be done. And that's speaking as a lawyer, so I'll stop there.
Don, Sonia, Minerva, Bonnie, thank you so much for participating. I know I've learned a lot. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming. And be sure to vote.